Everybody, and welcome to the NSWA's Knowledge in November series. My name is Leah Kongsrude, and I'm the Executive Director with the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, and I'll be your host today. So just a few housekeeping items. So for the presentation, if you could please turn off your video and keep your microphone muted during the presentation, that would be great. It helps with just kind of being able to hear the speakers, and also kind of saves a bit of bandwidth. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat feature of Zoom, which is, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, it'll be an icon that pops up and says chat. And if you click on that, it'll open another box, and you can put in a question there to, if you'd like to ask a question of the speaker. Questions will be addressed at the end of each presentation, and we hope to have some time for a couple questions at the end of each. And of course, all of our presentations will be posted on our website when we're done. Something new for today, and it was a suggestion from our speaker, Norine from Cows and Fish, is we're going to try to use a few polls today. So if for those of you who have used Zoom, it has a poll feature where basically it's a little survey that will pop up on your screen, and each one of you can pick an answer, and we can get some real-time interaction and information from you. So if this takes us a little bit of time, please bear with us. It is something we're trying new here for the webinar. So our first polling question is, how many Knowledge in November sessions have you attended this month? So you should now see a poll pop up on your screen, and you should be able to answer it. Awesome, the votes are flying in. So we have about 38 people here today, and we have about 30 people who have already voted. 33, 34, it's very exciting. Okay, let's share it, Elisa, and see what people have said. Great. So look, about 10 people said this is their first one, which is really amazing. So far, we've done 4 of these sessions, and we've had over 100 people attend the webinars. And a lot of you are first timers or new people coming to hear the presentation. So that's really great. But look, we have 9 that have attended all of them. So there's the keeners in the group. So hopefully you're finding them informative and fun. Okay, so you guys are awesome at doing the poll. Let's move on to the presentations. So the presentations we're doing this year are aligning with this year's theme, which is the 20th anniversary for the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. Our first forum in February was in person, and in that, we're really trying to focus on our 20 years of partnerships in watershed planning. So in February, we had 6 speakers, our partners, talk about progress in watershed planning. And this webinar series in November has been trying to do the same thing. So in the end, we'll have had about 5 or 6 speakers talk about the partnerships. So to highlight some of these partnerships and to celebrate our 20th anniversary, NSWA has created a new video. And the video really asked the question was, why is working with NSWA on watershed issues important to you? So we asked some of our key stakeholders to answer this question, and I'm going to show you the video now. So bear with me as I switch the screen. Here we go.
Water is the lifeblood of our land, whether it is for industrial use, agriculture, recreation, or just safe, sustainable drinking water. And it's important that we, through groups like NSWA, do our best to manage those for all the stakeholders that live and play along this river.
The river is integral for aquatic ecosystem health. Without a healthy river, fish and other real key species are going to be suffering. If we don't care for watersheds, then we can't expect all those other benefits.
We rely on the scientists and people that have the knowledge, the background as to what are the best practices for our river and our lakes.
We all are part of a watershed. So we have to be very aware moving forward of the actions of the everyday resident, but also the businesses and the stakeholders that are within the communities of the watershed.
We use the water, but we also have an impact on the water, so we have some responsibility on the river and the watershed itself. Of course, as a water utility, even before it reaches the intake of the water treatment plants, we want to make sure that we have the best water possible. It can be hard to do that without an organization like the NSWA.
Personally, I feel like every time I take a drink of water, I'm grateful for their work.
I would say to anybody, please do get involved. We all need to be coming together to do our part.
You will learn lots. You will meet some incredible people that are dedicated.
It strives to provide that science-based knowledge that helps us make good decisions within the watershed. And that's truly important if we want to make an appropriate use of this water.
And a big thank you to all of our partners who helped us put together that presentation. It was a delight to interview them, and we really appreciate all the efforts that they put in and all of our other partners put in as well. So the theme for today's series is again still about our partnerships. If those of you who attended the other ones, we had some people talk from our watershed stewardship groups, which is one type of a partner. We had a presentation from Alberta Environment and EPCOR, which again is another type of partner that we have. But a really large group that we do a lot of our work with is our other non-governmental organizations. So the other nonprofits in our world. And we really work closely with these, and they really support and complement the work that we do. And we try to make sure that that happens every day. So especially the groups that work on the ground, groups like Alice Canada, like ALMS or Alberta Agroforestry and Woodlot Extension Society, that's a mouthful, and ACA and Cows and Fish. We really work with these people. They have a lot of good connections in the community and have really had long-term relationships with landowners and municipalities. It's something that we can't replicate. So we really enjoy working with them, and we really depend on them to do on-the-ground work. So today we have a speaker from Cows and Fish, and Norine Ambrose is from Cows and Fish, and she has worked nearly 21 years with them. And she's focused on working with landowners, communities, and natural resource professionals to help them recognize the value of riparian areas and what they can do to maintain these areas as healthy, productive pieces of our landscape. And Norine really believes strongly that those who manage and use the land are critical to ensuring a healthy landscape. So while we let Norine get set up, we're going to do one other short poll, which will also help inform Norine of who's listening today. So the question is, who are you? What group most describes you? So if you could fill in the survey, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Great. Amazing again, 23, 25 people have voted. Looks like we have a race between non-governmental organizations, municipal governments. Great, 33 of 39. Let's share it, Elisa. Wow. So it looks like we have a tie there with NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and municipal government, followed closely by business and industry. Very interesting. So with that, I'm going to let Norine take over and share with us beavers, friend or foe. How can we live with them, and why should we?
Great.
Take it away.
Leah. Thanks, Leah. I'm assuming you can hear and see it okay. So I'll move on. And thanks for that introduction. I'm glad that there's such a diversity of people joining us today. Thank you for registering and attending. And we look forward to the questions you may pose us at the end. I work for an organization, as you heard, called Cows and Fish. And you certainly know some of the names on the registration for today. And you know that maybe we work on this thing called riparian, areas that are next to water that's influenced by water, that soil and vegetation responds. There are lake shores, our stream banks, our floodplains. And you might understand then why we work on beavers, because of course beavers influence those places and are an integral part of them. But one of the challenges that we have found over the years is that beavers can be a real battleground for love them or hate them. They can be a real challenge, and how can we figure out how to live with them, and why should we? So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So now even though we tested this, my presentation is not advancing. Let's hope it's going to in a second to catch up. Sorry, folks, we tested this right beforehand and it was working perfectly. It's not, there we go. Now it's cooperating. So we started this initiative with a number of partners, and particularly with the Mestakis Institute as part of our Putting Beavers to Work for watershed resiliency and restoration work. And so I'm going to be highlighting most of the work that Cows and Fish has taken the lead on, but this is a collaborative website that you see at the top there that has all of our joint work that we're doing and resources. So I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in more information. We know that beavers are an icon. They sort of are part of the Canadian identity, not only because that's what led to the settlement of Canada. Obviously, the First Nations people had existed with beavers for long periods of time, but the desire for hats in Europe led to the settlement of Canada and much of North America, and that change in landscape and change in the way things had been, obviously for millennia. But we still see beavers as an important part. They're on our nickel. They are important place names in many places, and they influence our thinking about ourselves. Often we think about beavers pretty much as a destroyer of things. They cut down trees. That's one of the things they do. They build dams. And often they plug things, and culverts being one of them, and flooding roads. This is the inside of the culvert that road is being flooded by. And so we often see those problems that they cause us, because they do cause those challenges frequently. And for those in the sort of Edmonton region in the last couple of years with all the extra water, there's been lots of flooding in general, some of which is related to beavers and even expanded. So how do we traditionally deal with that? Well, we blow up their dams, we shoot them, we trap them, or dig out the dams so the water can go, and flooding is the issue. And the problem is these problems keep coming back. They're repetitive, they're repeat, and they don't go away. And so these problem sites and problem areas that we deal with save us time, maybe we think, by doing it that way, but are there other ways? And so we've been embarking on this journey with our partners, many of who work with the counties, to try and resolve some of these challenges in ways that aren't as repetitive, aren't as inexpensive, and also acknowledge the value that beavers bring us. So are they good or are they bad? Well, probably you have an opinion on this. Most of the times when we ask this question, if you've had a bad experience in terms of flooding or tree cutting, you don't love beavers. If you haven't had those experiences, then you often like beavers. And but beavers are really not good or bad, they're just being beavers. So how can we understand how they behave and what they do to inform how we interact with them, to mitigate the problems and also maximize and optimize those great benefits they can also bring us? So beavers have these incisors that are harder on the outside. That orange layer is their enamel, and they continue to grow through their lifetime. So that's what they do. They cut down trees, and that keeps their teeth from growing too long. And that's their opportunity to not only get food and material for their dam building and their lodges, but of course to keep their teeth from getting too long. A typical beaver colony is 2 adults. They are considered monogamous. They have usually young of the year, the babies that were raised that year or born that year. They are as many as 4 to 6 can be born in a year, but typically they don't all survive, obviously. So there would be a couple of the current year's young and a couple from the prior year. And in the springtime, the 2-year-olds are sort of booted out and headed off to someplace new to find their own colony, because they're territorial, although they generally let family members set up closer territories than they would an unrelated individual. Where do they like to live? Well, they obviously need water, and they like as much connected water as they can. You can see on the right-hand picture here, the series of beaver dams that go kind of horizontal. They want as many places that they can get to in the water as possible. Obviously, they can walk on land, but they're more susceptible to predation and they're not as safe on land. So they create a moat. You can see in the bottom picture, the bottom right, that's their beaver lodge, sort of surrounded like a castle. That water provides that safety net, and obviously habitat for them. And the more edge habitat they create that's flooded, the more opportunities they have to find food and create that transition zone and access food sources. We tend to think that most of their food is wood, but in reality, it's only about half of what they eat is from trees and shrubs. And they don't eat the big logs, they're eating the bark and the leaves off of trees and shrubs, but they're eating lots of other things like cattails and bulrushes and pond lilies. They've been known to eat crop, obviously from nearby fields. Their wood consumption is much higher in the winter because that's what they have cached, which many would see right now is frozen material sticking out of the ice that they can access. And obviously during the winter, they can't access the resources on the land. But they do sometimes eat themselves out of house and home and get a little too busy, or in some cases, of course, they disappear from a site because of predation or human removal, and their dams can occasionally then fail with lack of maintenance. Basically, nothing's maintaining it. They will eventually fail. That generally isn't a flooding issue that's caused by the dams failing because they tend to fail gradually, although certainly some cases have been found where there were large dams that caused flooding downstream when dams burst. But as a general rule, that's not the main issue when dams give way. One of the things that those dams have been holding back and do hold back when they're maintained is in beaver ponds, there's a lot of slower water, which means sediment falls out of the water and gets trapped. And some of the largest ponds can store up to the equivalent of 380 tandem trucks of sediment material. So that's stuff that came off the land that they're helping slow down and trap and keep out of the water column. So they can be really beneficial for water quality because all of those soil particles are attaching other things. So soil is attached to phosphoruses and nitrogen particles, which aren't great for water quality. They help because of that trapping of material. They're also sequestering carbon and fecal coliform. So they do generally have a really important role to play in cleaning our water. And part of the sort of other invisible things they do, in addition to slowing down and storing water in a pond, is the sort of more invisible piece, the underground. So groundwater storage can exceed what we see at the surface by 5 to 10 times because it can be hundreds of meters sideways and also hundreds of meters downstream that water gets basically a chance to sit there longer and then soak into that shallow groundwater. So they're really important for water storage, which isn't something that's easy to see or to measure. The other thing that is hard to maybe acknowledge is sometimes we think they cause flooding. Beavers, ponds, and damming does cause that flooding sometimes. And we often don't recognize they also play a role in reducing flooding. So when there's a flood event, a rainfall or snowmelt event in the spring, they can take the peak off of it. They don't stop flooding, but each pond can hold a little bit more water usually, sometimes lots more, but generally only a small amount if beavers are kind of keeping it maintained the way they like it. And so the more beaver ponds you have, the more little bits of water that get stored up and reduce that overall intensity of flooding. That doesn't mean they're not flooding adjacent areas, but sort of the larger overall sort of stream flow peaks can be reduced. And part of that habitat that they create with their ponding and their damming is, of course, wildlife habitat, which is why they're considered a keystone species, because they affect the landscape in such a significant way. Sometimes we don't like how they're affecting it, obviously, because it's a negative impact on us. But from a wildlife perspective, they're obviously creating wetland habitat. They're expanding the riparian and wetland margin. So there's lots more edges and opportunities for those kinds of species. And that's both those that love the water as well as those that love the water organisms like the herons who might eat the frogs, for instance. If you want to learn more about a lot of these details, I encourage you to check out our documents on their website, and it's part of a larger larger workshop series that we do which some of you may have attended. It's kind of a several hour session where we talk more detail. I'm not going to cover the details, but I encourage you to reach out to us, myself and my colleagues, if there's something you'd like to book. In today's sort of online world without too many in-person events, we're looking to obviously make adjustments where we can and offer more of these Zoom or other online approaches. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the case studies that we've been involved in. One of the challenges, of course, is beavers do cause us challenges and problems: flooding, cutting trees, blocking of culverts. How do we address those realistically in a new or different way? And so one of the things that we've learned about is some of the work that Foothills County, now we used to be called MD of Foothills, did a number of years ago now, west of Calgary in the sort of Bragg Creek area. They had a repeat problem site that was regularly plugging. The culverts were kind of collapsed and plugged. The old ones you can see in the center top picture there, they weren't really providing any water flow. The beavers created additional damming wherever they had opportunity, so the water levels were raising, and the gravel road, which you can see in the bottom right picture, would get flooded. So access into the yard for that farmyard was at risk. But there were lots of neighbors who also really liked the beavers on the other side, who didn't want the dam to be removed. They liked the wetland habitat. They wanted the water. Some of their wells were influenced by that. They wanted the additional water storage. And so they had to spend quite a bit of time figuring out what solution would work in this site. And you can see that the pictures here have these new shinier looking culverts, what are called beaver-proof culverts. They basically have a T at the end with a grate on the top and the bottom of the horizontal pieces, so that you can perhaps see my mouse there. The beavers can't readily plug it, and they can't get stuff into it from the bottom or the top, and so that helps reduce their constant plugging of culverts and flooding of the roads. Of course, this is an expensive solution if you have to replace the entire culverts and dig up the road. In this situation, that was the decision they needed to make because of this site. You have to also dig out underneath the culverts, make sure it maintains a deep enough pool so that beaver basically can't reach up and plug it by standing on their feet. So this has been a really successful situation, and I encourage you again to look at some of the video on this situation that's on the Beaver Collaborative website. Another way that we've learned some folks are dealing with this is, Robin Hood bribes the beaver to spare Sherwood Forest. Well, beavers need and like to cut trees and shrubs, but they're also really willing to accept material if you give it to them. So Pierre here is the landowner who's actually adjacent to that prior site I just showed you. He got permission from the county to keep the trees and shrubs in that ditch area along the county road clear, which is something the county would normally do. And he cut it instead and took it and gave it to the beavers. And they've been very willing to make use of it. And we know some other landowners, as well as some conservation organizations, who are doing this in areas where they have unwanted material they can make use of, and insufficient material right where the beavers are living. It is obviously something that requires quite a bit of labor and manpower, so it's not a fix for all situations, but it is an option. The other thing that Pierre and others have found, including the, if you watch the Nature of Things, the Beaver Whisperer, is if you put out a tape, let's say, not too many of you have audio tapes anymore, but you can see a little top picture, a little mini ghetto blaster there. If you put that with the sound of running water in a particular place you want them to do more building, you can direct the location. So one of the techniques is to think about, how do we redirect them or direct them to places we're okay with dams being built, and encourage that use, so that they're not putting them where we don't want them. So that's another interesting technique about thinking about beaver behavior. And Beaver County launched an initiative a number of years ago, recognizing they had repeat problem sites and they wanted to reduce the conflict and the challenges. And they were working with the University of Alberta to both implement this coexistence challenge techniques and sort of monitor the impact and the value of it. So I thank Beaver County for a number of these slides, as well as the University of Alberta research. So like many places, the county has thousands probably of kilometers of roads, and many of those roads have culverts. This is an area east of Edmonton with low, flat-ish terrain, lots of wetlands, lots of small streams that are prone to be easy to flood by beavers, and result in flooding of roadways and and adjoining lands. So they embarked on this journey to try to put in pond levelers. Basically, you put a flexible pipe through the dam at a height that you're okay with. So you keep part of the pond and you keep the beaver dam. You want the beavers to maintain the dam, but you set the height at a height that you can basically live with. And so they installed, working with the university's Glynis Hood, a bunch of pond levelers that look, this is not a site from their work, but another location on the west of Edmonton that you can see. This is what a functional pond leveler would look like, the sort of the before the leveler and then after. So they installed these in a bunch of locations and over multiple years monitored them, both the cost, the maintenance, and the challenges. And what they found after 14 devices were installed, monitoring for 3 years, the research showed that the net benefit was over $64,000 in just the management and maintenance of these what would have otherwise be problem sites. When they added the value that wetlands themselves provide in all kinds of ecological goods and services, the net benefit was over $380,000. So they also found these are pretty cheap. They're inexpensive, around $1,000 to install them, which included the labor, the manpower, and the materials. So maintenance is pretty low, although it is required over time. You still have to follow up with them, like any management tool. The other thing that happened was around the same time, Dr. Glynis Hood and colleagues installed 12 additional devices in the Cooking Lake Blackfoot Provincial Recreation Area, which is on the east side of Edmonton as well. And they found that there were the cumulative value or cumulative cost of these dozen devices over 3 years was just over $16,500 approximately. That's pretty cheap over 3 years for 12 locations compared to the annual cost for all of the management on these kind of sites was over $100,000. So the cost savings of this kind of device when they're working and when they're well installed is really, really obvious and significant just from an economic perspective. And the maintenance costs were about $128 a year on these sites, which compared to hauling out big equipment that you might have, like excavating equipment to unplug culverts or hire trappers, was really cost effective for them. But one of the things that's important is that every technique has, learnings, things to do well and things that are maybe not to do. And this is an example of a fencing exclusion site, not related to the Beaver County locations, but where the fence isn't really installed in a way that it's preventing it from being plugged. In fact, it's not even flowing water. And the design doesn't prevent water from building up or prevent the beaver from packing around it. And one of the demonstration sites that we worked with in Lac St. Anne County, we helped and worked with them, and a group of folks from different organizations and agencies did a training day with us out there. You can see that it previously was easy for the beavers to plug. This is kind of right along a gravel roadway and at the end of a narrow spot on this long wetland. And beavers were repeatedly plugging it. And so we got in there and the county unplugged it and we put in this new beaver exclusion fence. One of the challenges you can see is we're right in the corner in that top right photo. There's not a lot of space between the edge of the wetland, the road, and the fence, that with the exclusion fence. And what happened over time, unfortunately, even with the high water levels in the last couple of years, the beavers managed to pack it and fill it around it, which as you can see in the top left photo. And so a revision basically had to be made, and that was to put a combo device. So it has a pond leveler that's inserted into the cage, basically the fencing. So that means that beavers can't get at the water flow and prevent it from continuing, even though they were able to pack around this exclusion fence. So they're not completely maintenance free, and sometimes you have to make adjustments. They're not the panacea. They're not going to work everywhere. Sorry, that's my timer telling me to be quiet. So how do we beat the beaver at his own game? Well, one of the things we do is we have to learn, right? We have to practice and try. That's what these demonstrations are. We're working with a number of landowners who have really tried a whole bunch of different things. They are quick to try stuff out and make things work in their own situations. They often have materials and supplies around that work. And they can even install these kinds of devices temporarily for winter feeding site that's flooded during a certain part of the year, or a pasture where one landowner wants the water and another doesn't because it's flooding crop. So finding those opportunities for diversity is important. It's also important to keep in mind that all of these devices, since they're in waterways, do require approvals, or at least you need to check if there's approvals needed depending on the situation. So of course, contact Alberta Environment and Parks. But we're learning and trying out these across the province, and I encourage you to, if this is something that would fit challenges you're facing. We're also looking at other kinds of things. This is an interesting thing that's actually being used anecdotally across North America and a few other sites. It's a sand paint recipe, coarse sand and latex paint on trees to reduce beavers wanting to chew the wood because they don't really want to chew the rough sand. The site on the left you can see was a landowner that we just happened upon who had tried this. Unfortunately, the paint isn't tall enough. The beavers could reach above it. And they also only painted one side of the tree so the beavers could walk around it, which clearly beavers can walk around it, so they did. The other thing we found in this new site we've done with Fish Creek Provincial Park in Calgary is you can of course paint it any color you want. They are in a public parkway, so they painted a color that would match the tree, which is the photo on the right. And we're waiting to see how it works. It's challenging to get enough grit into the mix and still get it on. So that's one of the challenges. I think we'd love to have some other people try out and see how it goes and keep us abreast of your trials. I'd also encourage you to check out some more information on the how-tos. We've got some videos on our website and lots of other resources. And for those of you that really want to get into the how-to part, join the Beaver mailing list by contacting Holly at Mistakis. And look at our map of tools. We're trying to get more people to post the projects they've done on these coexistence techniques so we can learn. So again, check that out on our shared website. But sometimes it's just easiest to say, let's let beavers have the willows or the poplars and have some space, and recognize that at times that means there's not many trees or shrubs left because they've taken most of them and they maybe do move on. So thinking kind of at a bigger landscape level, how can you work with your neighbors and in the whole watershed to keep those kinds of things in mind? This is a site where the beaver dam, for whatever reason, blew out. The beavers were no longer there, and it looks kind of muddy and messy, but it's the sediment that they had trapped, and over time it fills in. And that's again sort of giving the space and the time for the management needs that we have long term. So I encourage you to think about those opportunities to work with your neighbors and work in your area about how do we offer that time and space and find coexistence techniques that that hopefully address some of these challenges that the beavers do pose us. So looking at time and space can be a challenge because we don't always have that time or that space to work with in our own land we own or manage, but it is one of those things to think about. So I think we're going to do a final poll. I would love to get some feedback on the information I've presented so far today. So take a second and just fill in. Did you learn new information about beavers or their management? And while people are filling that in, I'll just say, you know, there is no one answer, of course. This is always a challenge. Beavers do provide great opportunity for us, but they also do cause some real challenges. And so learning how to work and live with them can be a challenge for sure. So thank you all for filling that in. It looks like 76% said they definitely learned something, and somewhat was everybody else. So great, I'm glad you learned something today, and hopefully you'll check out some of the additional information and resources that I've mentioned and linked. And as you heard at the beginning, the presentation will be shared, so you can also go back to it and look at it and find those resources. So I'm just actually, Leah, going to go to the final couple slides of thanking our funders, except that my thing has frozen again. Now, this must be the poll. The poll seems to want to slow things down. So I want to thank our funders, which is the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program from Alberta Environment and the Calgary Foundation as part of our partnership, and Cows and Fish's members and supporters. And feel free to contact anybody at Cows and Fish. This is the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance sort of staff basis folks, Edmonton, Carrie and Tanya, and Rocky Mountain House Angie, but we have others on our website. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Norine. It does look like there's a few questions. So Mary Ellen, can you take the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Our first question is from Ken Crutchfield, and he says, have you compiled any statistics on how extensive beaver costs are on a county by county basis and their willingness to use some of the alternatives outlined?
Actually, I didn't show it because I didn't have time to show everything I would have loved to have shown, but the work that Glenys Hood and her colleagues did, they actually surveyed 52, well, they sent it out to way more, but they got responses from 52, mostly municipalities, but also some parks and recreation areas from Alberta Environment. And they basically found that the average, the annual costs are $3 million that those particular 48 municipalities and I think 5 park districts spend on beaver management. And when you look at what I showed, that only a tiny percent of those groups were using these kinds of coexistence techniques. A few of them were, but mostly they weren't. So there's definitely an opportunity for a lot of additional cost savings. Again, they don't work everywhere. There's still going to be some of the conventional stuff we're used to doing, but I think there's definitely a lot of room for cost savings. And so if you check out Glenys Hood's research on the University of Alberta website, as well as Beaver County has some of their reports posted on their website, some pretty strong economic case.
Awesome. That's a really great statistic. Thank you. We have another question from Michelle, who says, what is the best way to protect new plantings of willows and aspens for restoration projects when beavers are in the area? I know you mentioned a bit about the techniques that the landowners had experimented with. Is that the best option, that paint?
I don't think it's very useful on small stuff, because you have to remember that young stuff is still respirating and breathing through its bark, because it's going to be small and green and not mature bark. So you probably aren't going to be able to paint the young stuff. If you're doing restorations planting, you probably need to do some sort of exclusion fencing on the land side, not so much necessarily like the exclusion fences I show around a culvert, obviously. I think that's probably your best choice, is just keeping the beavers out of where you've planted. To at least until they're big enough or you have enough success. Great.
I have some comments as well. Billy says, great presentation. Every time I think I know a lot about beavers, you teach me something new. And I have a question. Just in general, are the beaver populations currently, are they stabilizing, or are they increasing or decreasing, throughout the past few decades? I know we obviously don't have as much beaver as we would have pre-settlement, but.
Right, yeah, certainly it's assumed that there's significantly less than pre-settlement during pre-European era, but there's actually no population numbers. Alberta does not, beavers are not a species that population numbers are captured for or surveyed at all. So we don't actually know. Certainly anecdotally, we know there are some areas where they're still extirpated in Alberta, meaning they're not any present. Certainly some feedback we hear from local communities is also that they feel like they have way more than they used to. Probably in general, we have way less. In a settled landscape, there's a lot of conflict and a lot of challenges. So it's problematic having lots of beavers, but probably when you look at the kind of fur trading history numbers and imagery, we also had a lot more streamlined willows that were around every stream and every wetland, which we don't have. So the habitat is reduced, as well as the conflict opportunities are much higher. And probably they won't ever get back in some areas in the numbers they were, because the conflict would be there, but also the habitat has been probably modified long term. But certainly so there's no population numbers in Alberta, but that's just sort of anecdotal observation of things.
Awesome. Leah, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, one more quick question.
Okay, so I took one of your courses a few years ago, and I recall that there were some people in the room who were wanting to relocate their beavers out of their property, and then some people in the room who were eager to actually find some beavers in the room. And we talked about potentially, establishing some sort of beaver trading or dating service, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if that ever was ever established in the end, or if you're aware of any of that kind of trading happening. And trading is maybe not the best word for it, but exchange happening.
Right.
And are beavers easy to relocate, or do they struggle with that?
Yeah, so the quick answer is we have basically a spreadsheet where we keep beaver donors and those
Donor
willing to
system is a good word.
give them and receive them.
Yes.
But beaver relocation in Alberta is basically not allowed currently based on the regulations for wildlife movement. It can be with special permits for research, but as a general rule, it's not something that an average person can just go and do. It does require significant permitting, and that's because of a few things, wildlife handling criteria and things like that in terms of disease transmission. Also because beavers, from a humane handling perspective, they might have kits, and that means the babies might be, you know, still nursing. You need to take a whole family unit ideally. If you're moving, obviously you can't move young ones that don't have their mother with them, and because they're paired, you would generally want to move the male and the female. And we don't have handling facilities in Alberta. Some jurisdictions actually have specific handling facilities where they house temporarily to acclimatize and, you know, say capture the whole family and then move the whole family. The other thing is because they're territorial, usually good habitat already has beavers, or good habitat that might be empty is also posing potential conflict sites. So in Alberta, we also don't have any guidance on how or where are you allowed to put them and get permission from the places or people that might be affected by putting them. So the neighbors or upstream or down and nearby, you know, because beavers aren't going to necessarily stay where you tell them. They're going to move. So moving beavers is currently a challenge, except for under sort of special permits.
Awesome, thanks. That's very, very informative. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Norine. Yeah, beavers are an intriguing topic, and if you live in Alberta, you've probably had to deal with them on a pro or a con side either way. So it's always great to learn a little bit more about them. Thanks, Norine.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. Our next speaker is actually NSWA. So we had a few comments from people saying they really wanted to find out what NSWA was up to. So I've put together just a few slides of, you know, kind of some teasers of what we're up to. And hopefully in the new year, we're going to have some more webinar series about what NSWA is up to and a little bit more detail on some of the really cool studies that we're undertaking. So what's keeping NSWA busy these days? So we really are directed by our 4 key goals, which are really aligned with what watershed planning and advisory councils should be doing in Alberta, which is collaborative watershed planning, leadership and watershed management, watershed knowledge sharing, and then of course, the maintaining our organization. So I'm going to just give you a teaser on a few of those items. So really our collaborative partnerships are really the foundation for a lot of the work we do. And right now we have 3 kind of sub-watershed alliances that we work with. The Headwaters Alliance, which is really the Modeste and Strawberry sub-watersheds. So that's the area around Rocky Mountain House and Drayton Valley, a little bit of Wetaskiwin and thrown in there, and the towns of Devon, things like that. We have the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance, which is just the Sturgeon sub-watershed, and there's 12 municipalities that make up that alliance, plus First Nations, NGOs, and Alberta Environment. And then lastly, our Vermilion River Watershed Alliance is in the east, so more of Beaver County, like Norine was talking about, but also much further east. So Vermilion River, Two Hills, Biggerville, that kind of area of our sub-watershed. Plus Alberta Environment belongs to that group, plus some NGOs, and our Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada also takes a big role. And then lastly, we do a lot of work with our lake stewardship groups. So those are kind of the key partnerships. So I'm just going to give you a slide on each of them. So the Headwaters Alliance, as I said, was in Strawberry and Modeste, and really they've been focusing their work on riparian intactness studies and actually have taken it to the next level. So the Headwaters Alliance was really the first group to try out this new measurement of riparian, and we don't want to call it health, but it's more like condition using GIS data. And now they've moved into what's called the Riparian Health Action Plan, which is taking all this amazing data that they were able to capture and develop and move it on to the ground. So how do we get our stakeholders to use it? And how do we get the information to the people who can really do the on the ground projects? So this is just an example of like a briefing sheet that we've provided that can kind of gives a summary of the project that our stakeholders can use. We've also done summary reports of the larger reports. So really just a two-sided summary of what's happening in the Modeste watershed in terms of riparian intactness. What about in Strawberry? And then also joining that with the pressure indicators and coming up with areas that are really great for conservation and areas that are great for restoration. So we call in those the sub-watershed report cards. The next steps the group are taking is in this Riparian Health Action Plan is really a couple things. One is that we want to get some more information on, we have this riparian data, but we want to know what the landowner types are for those areas so we can really focus our work. So are most of the landowners that we've done the riparian intactness on, are they mostly agriculture? Are they mostly crop producers or pasture? Is it, residential development, country residential development? Is it parks? Is it municipalities? And that's really going to help us figure out those areas that are really needed for conservation and or restoration. Who are the main landowner types that we're going to be dealing with? Also working on a couple things such as a setback calculator. So once you get down on the ground, you get to a more specific site. Is there a little bit more detailed calculation that you can do to give you, I guess, more site-specific distances that you can use? And then, of course, comes with our additional studies. So what should our targets be? Let's do a literature review, find out what other people are doing. And then, of course, compile it all into a riparian strategy. So the Headwaters Alliance is very busy. And Mary Ellen Shane is the project coordinator or cat wrangler for that group. Now, the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance has just finished, after 5 years of lots of work, their watershed management plan. So it is just being rolled out this fall. It has been presented and approved by all of the 12 municipalities, which is amazing. And it really defines 6 major outcomes. And these are all defined by the stakeholders and largely by the municipalities and NGOs and Alberta Environment as well provided input. So it's really around aligning policies and plans, safe, secure drinking water supplies, healthy aquatic ecosystems, reliable water supplies, and this is largely for economic or agricultural needs, wise land use, which is really important in the Sturgeon subwatershed where development is really at a very high rate. And then, of course, promoting local and regional initiatives. So the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance group, the steering committee, came up with what their priorities were going to be for the next 3 years. And these are really what they are. Riparian and wetland conservation restoration strategies, expanding on a water quality monitoring program that they started in 2016, really working on planning, alignment, and tools for the planners. We're finding that with a lot of development that's going on in this municipalities is that the planners really need tools to help them define where are the environmentally sensitive areas, how much should we be setting back from a shoreline. And what are overlay maps that are going to help us identify areas that are, flood hazards or steep slopes. And then lastly, but never leastly, is the communication and engagement. This group really wants to start looking outwards. We've really done a lot of work on the studies over the last 5 years and looking inward and talking together. We now want to get out there and really share the information. So that's what that group's going to be working on for the next 3 years. And luckily, we did apply for and receive an Alberta Community Partnership grant. And it's $200,000, which is going to be funding these steps for the next 3 years. The Vermilion Watershed Alliance is actually our oldest alliance, and they've been around for a while. They actually have a watershed management plan, and they've been working on the ground projects pretty intensely for the last 5 years. So our coordinator for that group, Michelle Gordy, actually sat them down and said, look, we have accomplished a lot in the last 5 years. What do you guys want to focus on for the next 3 years? And the Vermilion group really has these 5 key goal areas in their water management plan. And they, again, want to focus on this. on these items. And they just recently set their priorities. And really what they want to focus on is they have 10 priorities for the next 3 years. 2 of them are on communications, a couple are on surface water quantity and quality, 3 of them are around ecological health, and then a couple are on planning, alignment, and communications activities that are kind of combined. And as well, there's one on groundwater supply. So as I said, the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance has really been doing on-the-ground projects for the last 5 years. We received a $1.4 million grant from the Watershed Restoration and Resiliency program, and done a lot of projects on the ground in the last 5 years, which is quite work intensive. And right now we're just winding up that grant, and we're taking a lot of time to celebrate. So one of the things that the group produced was this nice booklet called Restoration and Enhancement Project Summary Booklet, where it highlights all of the projects that have been done, has quotes from the landowners, really celebrates the work that this group of volunteers has completed in the last 4 to 5 years. Also, the website, so the Vermilion River Watershed has their own website, is we've really been trying to do some more communications and keeping the website up to date. So based on one of the recommendations, we've actually started kind of a blog. So once a month, we're providing information on key topics that are of interest. And Norine will be happy to know that in September we had Living with Beavers, How to Coexist with Nature's Eco-Engineer as a topic. So beavers are always high on the list. And then lastly, our lake stewardship groups, I wanted to give a shout out to them and really kind of highlight some work that's been going on. So the Wabamun Lake Council has really been, again, working on a management plan for the last 3 years. And really they've got it now to the final form, and they're likely going to be getting it out in the totally final form here before the end of the year. And one of the things we were lucky to have this summer, NSWA hired 2 summer students. So Rachel and Jillian were here to help us. Normally they would have went to our community events and done a lot of outreach. But because of COVID, we had to kind of alter the plans. So instead, they did a lot of lake work, which was really wonderful. They were able to support ALMS, Alberta Lake Management Society, with some sampling, and went to quite a few of our lakes in our watershed, right from Brazo and the upper watershed out to our frog watershed in the east. So they got to do some fun traveling. And one of the other things they were able to help was the Wabamun Lake asked if they could distribute some information materials to each house to house in some of their communities around the lake. So this is just the bottom here is a picture of Rachel with a little information package, and they went to some of the summer villages and distributed this. They had a great time, and it was a great way we were able to support our lake stewardship groups. We have about 9 other lake stewardship groups, everything from Antler Lake, Hubbles, Mayatan, I'm going to miss a few, Jackfish, Lac St. Anne, and Isle Lake. And one of the things we're actually trying to do, again, to try to support them is for Isle Lake and Lac St. Anne, we actually completed one of these 2-pager summary reports of their State of the Watershed report, which was done several years ago. So we're hoping to complete these for the other lake groups so that they'll have a handy 2-page summary of their State of the Watershed reports that they can use on their websites or hand out to their lake owners, or just share with other people who might be interested. So keep posted for those. And then really, I just wanted to highlight a few of our leadership and watershed management plans. For those of you who attended our first series, we had a great presentation from EPCOR and Alberta Environment on the Watershed Water Quality Monitoring Project, which is really a 4-year program that's sponsored by EPCOR. And it's got 19 new or upgraded monitoring stations on the North Saskatchewan main stem and tributaries, which is really a phenomenal step forward in water quality monitoring for the watershed. And then another project that we're working on, and Mary Ellen is the lead for this, is on an extended riparian assessment project. So the work that the Headwaters Alliance did in the Strawberry and Modeste on riparian intactness was really quite amazing. So we were able to apply for a Canadian Agricultural Partnerships grant and $500,000, and we're actually expanding it to the majority of the watershed. The headwaters or the mountainous area is really not great for this type of assessment, but we're definitely expanding it into the east. And we're also partnering with the Battle River watershed just to our south. And they've actually got a grant as well from Canadian Agricultural Partnerships. Plus Red Deer was able to get a grant to do some intactness work. Our partners up in the Beaver subwatershed and Athabasca. So this is an amazing inter-WPAC project that we're undertaking probably for at least the next 3 years. So I love this figure. Just for the Battle and for the North Saskatchewan, we're going to be assessing over 25,000 kilometers of shoreline, which is pretty impressive considering that we probably only had several hundred kilometers that had assessments prior to doing this method. The other really interesting part of this project is, again, it's great to have the data, but how do we get it to the people so they can use it? So a big part of this grant is developing a public riparian web portal. And it is going to be a GIS map-based website where people can go zoom in and check out the riparian data. So not only just access the riparian intactness assessment work that's been done, but it's also provides resources for the users. So what projects are going on in your area? If I'm interested in doing a project, who do I contact? So this is currently under development, and hopefully in the new year, we'll be able to start sharing it with some of our stakeholders. And along with the riparian portal comes a lot of resources. So again, one of our partners in doing this is Cows and Fish. They do riparian stuff. They've been doing it for a long time. Norine's done it for 21 years. So we're really pulling that knowledge and expertise from Cows and Fish, from Alberta Environment as well, some other stakeholders from municipalities and other NGOs to put together some really good comprehensive information so that when people come to this web portal, they're going to have it all there right for them. And our hope is that it's not only going to be the North Saskatchewan data, but hopefully the data from the other WPACs as well. And lastly, just wanted to share a few things with you just on our knowledge sharing, which is our goal 3 of the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. Many of you know it's been our 20th anniversary and our website really highlights this. Of course, we had just showed you the video. This is just Jim Duncan from Clearwater County, one of our key members of our Headwater Alliance, and you're all participating in Knowledge in November, something that we had to adapt to with the COVID issues. We also have our monthly newsletter, which we have over 700 people subscribed to already, and our social media accounts, which many of you follow. And yes, for those of you who loved our calendar that we did last year for the anniversary, we are creating a new one for 2021. So we're going to have to come up with innovative ways to get it out to you. We're going to be doing a lot of mailing since we can't meet you in person. But if you are interested in a calendar, just send us an email and we'll see what we can do. So just our last polling question is, did you learn something new about NSWA for your Knowledge in November session today? And the options are yes, some new things, not so much, or I want to know more. Awesome, you guys are really getting this. This is like, people are responding right away. We've got already 23 responses. And awesome. Okay, let's share it. It looks positive. So definitely yes, and some new things. And one wants to know a little bit more. So that's awesome. So again, the purpose of these speaker series is really to get information out to you. We are going to be probably doing a follow-up survey and asking people about, if we do this in the new year, what would it look like? What were your favorite topics, or do you have topics you'd really like us to do? And we'll use that when we come up with it in the new year. So just to let you know again, all of the presentations will be on site. Check out our landing page. There's always a what's going on. There'll probably be a note there for, hey, you want to see all the sessions? Here, check it out here. For those of you more keen on the NSWA website, It's always under our resources tab. We have a lot of resources, and we have a special column or tag just for our newsletters, studies and reports, and our presentations, and it'll be there. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have a new set of webinars series coming up in the new year. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to give us an email. I don't think we have enough time for questions, but if you do have questions, just send them on in. Thanks again, so everybody.
Thanks, Leah.
Okay.
That was great.